Bear with me, guys. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Someone just give us a thumbs up if you can hear me, all right, in the chat. Muted. Right, hold on a second then. Bear with me. Mic's on. Right, can you hear me now? Oh, hang on, maybe it's because of that. Hold on a second. You'll have to bear with me because this is brand new. Right, can you hear me? Sounds strange. That's weird. Wonder why that is. Hold on a sec. Sounds like the engines. Sounds like engines running in a room. Okay, don't know why that is. Right, well, hold on. Let me just take the mic out. Right, that's using the phone mic, which I know won't be great, but can you hear me better now? Yeah, good. Good now, thank you. Brilliant. Okay, well, we are a couple of minutes early, but that's just because I'm a tech idiot and didn't manage to work out this whole scheduling thing, so sorry about that. So we'll just give it a minute for everyone to join, and then we'll get started. I was going to talk today about the latest development that I've just seen, which is I've just been reading it in the Stream app. So I'll just bring that up and I'll read you the headlines from the story. It's about Ross Brawn and his new plan for, first of all, the lower budget cap that everyone seems to have agreed on a call today. And secondly, his plan to create this F1 bubble that Formula One's talking about, enabling a kind of safe environment where everyone's going to be tested to create this little bubble that will be able to travel around the world and hopefully get some racing done. So we're going to talk about that in a moment, but as I say, just give it 2 minutes for everybody to join, and we'll go from there. Let me just find the story. Let's see who's with us anyway. Have you still got static, or are we good? Are you saying the camera's a bit... hold on, let me see if it needs a wipe. There you go. Tell us a story. Hello, John Norris. I recognise that name. And Chris A. All the regulars here. Well done. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining along. That's great. I recognise so many of your names now because you're so regular at commenting on the YouTube videos. I love it. So thank you. We've built a really nice little community here. So I'm really pleased that you've all come along to join. That's great. So there we go. We've got 263 people on board at the moment. That's great. Let's see, camera needs a wipe. Yeah, I've just tried that. I don't know why that's slightly hazy. Maybe it's because it's slightly low light, but anyway, you can see me, can't you? You can see me. I think this is day one. It's going to get better from here on in, right? I have got a much better camera. I'm using a phone for this, but I will get to use my big camera. I'm just waiting for a capture card to arrive in the post, and it's not going to be here this week. So this week will be a little bit makeshift. But we'll get there, and if it works, well, we'll continue it. You can let me know if you think it's going to work over the course of the week. I'm going to try and keep it to about half an hour. I think we should try and be pretty strict on that, otherwise these things can definitely just roll on forever, and I know that means we won't get to some of your kind of questions or comments, so apologies for that, but we'll be back again tomorrow night. So if you want to join in every night this week, 9 p.m, same time, we'll pick a story and we'll talk about it. Right, well, look, it's 9 o'clock, so let's give it a go. 333 people. Thank you very much for all coming along and joining. I'm going to start this off. I'll start it by reading out some headlines on the on the Seedstream app. And the one that I wanted to talk about most of all, because it really is kind of breaking news today, you may have seen this on the Sky Sports vodcast that they did earlier. Ross Brawn was on. And two things really that are kind of revelations. I guess they're breaking news. One is that, in fact, let's start with this. Let's start with the budget cap. The budget cap looks like it's been agreed now on a conference call with all of the teams this week to bring that down to $145 million. Still a huge sum of money, isn't it? It seems crazy that we talk about such a massive sum of money, that's now a really low figure. But that's less than half of what the big teams will be spending or are spending right now. So that is a significant drop for those people. Now, I know that it doesn't include things like driver salaries. It doesn't include the salaries of the three highest paid people within that team. And it also doesn't include things like marketing costs. But $145 million is a world away from where we are. And it took us a long time to get down to 175 million, which was the original agreed figure before all of this global pandemic kicked in. And now what Ross Brawn is saying, in fact, I was going to read you that, wasn't I? Look, Ross Brawn is saying that the switch, that the focus now has switched. Let me just read what he says. He says the budget cap's initial objectives were to make a more competitive field. And I think with the situation that we have now, then the economic sustainability of Formula One becomes the priority. So the focus has switched from closing up the field and making the racing better by making a budget cap that brings the performance gap of the teams together. So actually just keeping Formula One alive. But of course, it's not quite as straightforward as that, because there are a couple of things. And in the same article, in fact, Christian Horner goes on to say that he thinks it's not going to work because there are so many different ways of reporting budget up and down the grid. For example, he cites the example that he says it's a false economy. He said the cap. He said it'll be impossible to police because every corporate identity is different. Ferrari, he says, report one set of accounts for their entire business across road cars and F1. How on earth are you going to unpick that? And that's a fair point, isn't it? Policing this is going to be one of the hardest challenges of all of it. And I know loads of you have messaged me to say, it's a joke. How can they possibly police it? Accounting is one of the things that you can be incredibly creative in sort of really, in staging your accounts. And if we're doing that on the grand scale of Formula One, where there's a direct competitive advantage to being able to spend more money, well, that feels like it's going to be a real challenge. I think what they're saying is that they are setting out the consequences of getting this wrong as being severe, even as severe as being disqualified from the championship. So what do you think? I mean, do you think this can work? Do you think the budget cap's a good idea? And do you think it can possibly work? I mean, loads of you already saying that Ferrari will find a way around this. I don't think it's going to be just Ferrari. I think these are, first of all, my opinion is, here you go, look, his creative is just a creative way of saying cheating. That's going to be the perception, isn't it? That's going to be the perception, in that if you can find a way around these, there is going to be a competitive advantage. Just like there is in any of the rules, the technical regulations, the sporting regulations. If they can get around it, there is an opportunity to create yourself an advantage. How will they police it? Well, the way they're going to police it is they've employed a high-level accounting firm which have got the gig, and essentially what they're going to do in the beginning is teams will submit their accounts to this company. I can't remember which company it is. That company will have the ability to obviously monitor those accounts, but also do spot checks at any point. So I presume that will mean they'll be able to go into a team's financial accounting system. They'll be able to check for irregularities. They'll be able to double check the figures that a team has submitted, just like I suppose the Inland Revenue is able to do if they want to with any company. So yes, like with any company, there are often ways around these things, and it's going to take a little while to sort out. So I think the good thing is, I saw somebody just say there, it's worth a try. When the in-house accountants move, who's that? Raoul Vade. When the in-house accountants move, it's going to be interesting. That's a very good point, isn't it? Because at the moment we have that's a really good point. At the moment we have there's a high value placed on some of the big technical people within our teams, and we look after them. We try and keep them within the confines of our team. We put them on big gardening leave contracts so that they can't go and take our technical secrets to another team. You're absolutely right. You know, if there's big financial secrets or creative ways of accounting, will those guys suddenly become very valuable and protected within this Formula One community? Will they become a hot commodity? Very good point. Joe Zaydan, the first year will set the tone. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Do you know, that is the point, isn't it? And what you may or may not know is that in 2020, which obviously hasn't turned out the way we thought, all of the teams signed up to do this, to operate and submit accounts voluntarily this year. There were never going to be any penalties for doing anything wrong this year, but they were kind of doing a dry run this year to see how it worked, for the FIA to be able to understand how they might police it, for this accounting police to work that bit out as well. I guess with no racing and no income and little expenditure, all of that's slightly out the window at the moment. But it's a shame, because that would have been a really nice test case. What would happen to teams that just sorry, I missed that one, it faded away. Here we go. Can teams get to square? Somebody said to me, you need to get someone moderating comments, and you're absolutely right, they're flying through. Let me see if I can see them on here. They're going a bit slower. I could see teams moving their head office to a tax-free country to save even more money. Christopher Brown. You know, things like this, these are all the things that are going to end up having to be worked out. And I don't think any of us know exactly what will happen. You can bet your bottom dollar teams will be looking at this like they do with the technical regs when they're released, trying to find loopholes, trying to find ways around it. The one thing I would say, and tell me if you agree on this or not, but with what's going on in the world right now, with everybody starting to be a little bit more understanding of each other, with teams working together on projects like Project Pit Lane, creating these ventilators. You may have read a story yesterday where Christian Horner saying some of the Renault engineers were working together in their Renault team kit alongside the Red Bull engineers inside their factory. Never a concern about secrecy. They were just getting on with a job that was more important than Formula One. I do wonder if there's a slight change of heart, and whether that will stick around post-pandemic, and whether there's a feeling that this budget cap is here, perhaps like Ross Brawn says now, for the good of the sport. Will that become more important, or will we just go back to our old ways very quickly and every man for himself? What do you think? Put show chat on. Have I not got the chat? Can you not see the chat? Oh, okay, sorry. I can. Let me see how I do that. Hold on a minute. There we go. Can you see that now? Red Bull and Renault, unthinkable. I know, isn't it? It was unthinkable. Can you guys see the chat on the screen? Every man for himself. Slow chat. Yeah, I've been looking for slow chat. I think what there we go. Let's go for top chat. So this, hopefully on my setting now, I can't tell me what you can see. Chat is on. So I'm just getting a filtered version of the chat. I won't see every message, unfortunately, but otherwise they just fly through the screen and I won't see them all. So yes, you can see the chat. Great. Excellent. So yeah, what do you think? Do you think Formula One will go back to its old ways really quickly, or do you think we might get some positivity out of this? Do you think teams might start to appreciate that the sport, as well as some of the teams, are under threat? Yeah. Well, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? I think that I hope that there will be some of this will be left over, some of this positivity that we're seeing, some of this more understanding nature, not just in Formula One, but in the world. But, you know, I hope we'll maybe get some people starting to see the bigger picture a little bit more, at least for a little while, you know, whilst we get through this rocky ground, perhaps. But I do wonder if before long, of course, the competitive spirit. Oh, look, there's my wife. A big red heart from Claire Priestley. Thanks, darling. She's in the other room. Back to the V12s, please. Yeah, who's that? Can Cracker. Do you know what? How many people would love to see a V12 or a V10 even back in Formula One? I mean, it's never going to happen, unfortunately. I get people messaging me every week saying, wouldn't it be amazing? Do you think now that we've got you know, we're coming to the end of perhaps these the combustion engines life in the world? Do you think we might just go, instead of going fully electric, just go back to something loud and brutal and raw like a V12? Yeah, V12 baby, V12 turbo. I'd love some of that. We all would love some of that. And do you know what? I think there's a place for that somewhere. Maybe in a different series, you know. I think there is a place. People would watch that, wouldn't they? People don't want to lose that sound forever. But I can't see it in Formula One. I think Formula One is going to be constantly moving forward. I can't see it going in a backwards direction. Do you see Alonso making a comeback? No, not in Formula One, I don't. I think not because he's not good enough, not because he doesn't have a desire to be world champion again. I think he does. I think he has very few options in this sport of where to go, good options. I can't see him back at Ferrari. I can't see him back at McLaren. They've moved on. Renault perhaps is one of his only options, and is that a good option for him? I can't see it. He's burnt too many bridges. He's an amazing driver. I have total respect for him on the racetrack, but as I've said to you guys before, he's burnt too many bridges, and that's cost him in his career. It's now costing him in IndyCar as well, isn't it? Recently with Honda pulling the plug on an engine supply for him. So these things matter. Never burn your bridges. Who was it? Nico Rosberg once said to me, he said, you always meet twice in life. I can't remember who said passed that advice on to him, but somebody very well known. He said, you always meet twice, so never burn that bridge, because you'll meet that person again, and you may need something from them, or you may want to rekindle that relationship. Good advice, Nico. Right, do you know what? Let's get on to the next part of this question. It's 9:10. I just want to move on to the other part of what came out of today's Sky Sports podcast with Ross Brawn, because I also think this is really interesting. We've been talking about it on the channel recently, but he was outlining his COVID-19 screening plans. So when Formula One goes racing, if Formula One goes racing again, he has set out more or less how the process might work. Now, we've all been wondering, how on earth can it work? Could it work? Formula One has set out this vague idea of what they're, and of course it's all still based or still reliant upon government restrictions being lifted on so many different factors. But what Ross Brawn has been saying is this. He says, we're working very closely with the FIA. The FIA are doing a great job of putting together the structure that we need, and everybody will be tested and have clearance before they can go racing. Then every 2 days, they'll be tested whilst in the paddock, he continued. And that will be with an authorised authority and system. Certainly for all the European races, we'll be using the same facility to conduct that testing, and we can assure that everyone's been tested who's in that environment and tested regularly. And then we'll have restrictions on how people are moving around in the paddock, because we can't socially distance within a team. So we have to create an environment within itself that's effectively a small bubble of isolation, and the teams will stay within their own groups. They won't meet up with other groups and mingle, and they'll stay in their own hotels. There are no motorhomes going to be there. So I think that's quite interesting. They are really trying incredibly hard to make this happen. There are still a huge number of challenges, as we touched on the other day in a video, but testing people every 2 days within the paddock, that's well over 1,000 people, even if you take it down to its minimum number. What do you think about that? Because one of my biggest things, and I was talking to somebody about this last night, is what's the public perception of this going to be? If you are throwing tests around, thousands of tests every couple of days, which is what it will be, and yet some people, even in this country and in other countries on the front line, can't get a test. Frontline medical workers or care workers maybe can't get a test. If Formula One's chucking them around like sweets, is that going to be frowned upon? Are people going to really fall out of love and turn on Formula One? What do you think? It is a logistical nightmare, David Walker. You're absolutely right. It's a crazy idea. Look, Formula One are desperate to get this happening, to get races happening. Formula One is really desperate because of all the financial things that I've talked about on this channel, the financial penalties that will come if we don't go racing, if we don't get enough racing. And that's through sponsors, through broadcasters, as well as for the teams some will undoubtedly not survive if we can't get enough racing, and therefore they can't get enough income. Somebody just asked how long the tests take. They think they have now found a test actually that is much quicker than the previous ones have been getting results back. So within hours, rather than days, getting tests back, results back from tests. That's how they think they're going to do it. Let's see. Difficult to say. The plan for testing, I can't see the plan for testing working out well with the public. William Hussey. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big worry. I think Formula One have to balance carefully the need for income and the need for keeping their business and the business of all the teams going with the public perception of Formula One. I think it's a really important side to this that must not be overlooked. If people fall out of love with the sport or turn against the sport, people won't watch the sport. And then where's the business model at that point? UK media would make a big thing about tests for F1 staff. I mean, they would, wouldn't they? I mean, it's the same with football. Premier League are going through similar conversations right now and having to talk. It's easier for them because they don't have to move around the world. They're moving within the confines of the UK, but still they're talking about trying to set up this same kind of bubble in which they can test people, protect the environment and keep it sealed off. So they're also a very easy target. Footballers are a really easy target for the media and particularly for non-football fans. Formula One, I think, will be very similar. And what happens if someone tests positive? If somebody tests positive, they won't be allowed into the circuit. And you know, we're talking about once you're in country. First of all, you wouldn't be allowed to travel, so you'll be tested before you travel. If you test positive, obviously you won't be allowed to travel, and you'll have to go into a period of quarantine. The problem is, if you've been mixing with your team and you test positive, does the rest of the team have to go into quarantine? These are all questions that I don't know the answers to, and I think, you know, lots of people don't know the answers to at this stage. But the big problem for Formula One is if they create this environment that they think is safe and sterile and protected, and then somebody somehow breaches it. If there's a positive test or even symptoms from within that environment, the whole thing kind of falls apart. It's a big risk. The rewards are great in terms of finance for everybody, in terms of survival for the teams, in terms of jobs. It's also a huge positive, if we can make this happen, for the morale of you and I, for Formula One fans who are desperate to see something. In the same way football can lift the nation when people get behind it, if we can make this happen. So this is not just some frivolous thing all about money. Yes, it is about money, but what comes with money is saving jobs, saving companies within our sport and businesses and teams. But also, of course, we're all desperate to see Formula One again, but it has to be done in a really safe manner. Should they have cut the racing to 2 days to limit the amount of people moving around? I think there are still discussions around changing the Grand Prix weekend format. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if something like that happens. But the point is, once you're there, you're there. So whether that's 2 days or 3 days, you're already in that environment. And maybe at that stage, you're already in, you've presumably tested clear and things are good to go, I guess, at that point. Like they do with motorhomes, could they set up the health zone somewhere near the circuit? Yes, they could. So that these are all things that are being worked out in the background. They're questions that I don't know the answers to. And because it's unprecedented, because no one's done this before, they're having to work this out on the fly. And what always happens, and we know this from Formula One, don't we? When we make a rule change, when we make some kind of change to the format that everyone's so familiar with, there's always unintended consequences to every change that we make. You know, that's Formula One's littered with examples of that. The trouble with this is that the unintended consequences could be severe in some cases, couldn't they? So I think it's a very difficult game they've got to manage. They will only do it when it's safe to do so, I'm sure, and let's hope they can make it happen. What team do you think is best prepared for this new schedule? Well, always, and that is a good question, because when we're in this difficult, ever-changing environment, who is going to be best prepared? Who's it going to suit? Who's it going to hinder in that circumstance? It almost always suits the big teams because they're able to adapt to any changes quicker than the smaller teams are. Yes, any change provides an opportunity, and a small team might just get lucky on some occasion with something around this if they change the format or if they change the way a Grand Prix weekend works. Some small team may just, luck in and get some lucky break. But the reality is almost always the big teams have the biggest advantage because they have the most resources. They're able to put different people on different things and adapt to things better. Chris A, 720 viewers. Yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for coming along. This is the first time I've ever done this. I'd love to know, both now but also afterwards, what you think of it, whether you think we can do that again. I mean, we're going to do it again. I'm going to try it every night this week just to give it a test. If you've got any suggestions, I'll try and find the slow chat. I'll try and see if I can clean the lens of my camera. And I'll try and sort the mic out. I don't know how this is working. I'm just using the phone mic. I had a fancy mic plugged in, but you got loads of static with that. So we'll give it a go and we'll work it out over the course of the week. Do it more often. Great. Brilliant. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you all coming along. And tomorrow somebody suggested setting this up as a scheduled live so that you'll get a notification. Someone said I did it yesterday. I did do it yesterday, totally by accident. So yeah, big shouts to everyone who joined yesterday for about a minute when I was accidentally live. I was just setting the thing up, trying to test it, chatting away to Mrs. P in the other room, smashing away on the keyboard. And I looked up at the screen and there was sort of 80 odd people sitting there watching. There we go. Yeah, so I will try and figure some of these things out. But look, we've got about 10 minutes left. So what do you want to talk about? Shoot me a question and we'll use that as the next talking point. How about that? If F1 folds, what will happen to F2 and F3? From K. Nielsen. Okay, let's talk about F2 and F3. What if F1 fold? First of all, I don't think F1's going to fold. I think we're a long way off that. I think we might be looking at a different F1, but F1's not going to fold. I think let's look at a worst case scenario, which I hate doing, but let's look at a worst case scenario that maybe the manufacturers all decide they want to leave F1 and take their marketing money out of motorsport and just go into other, people aren't buying cars. Let's say the big manufacturers left. That's not going to kill F1. It will drastically change it. But what it gives F1 is a massive opportunity to change drastically as well, to adapt and maybe create an F1 that may not be attractive to the big manufacturers, but could be attractive to smaller teams, to independents and the likes of Cosworth and these smaller engine companies. Now, I know that's not what we're all desperate to see, perhaps some of you may be, but I think Formula One is way too big to just fold. If something like that happened, Formula 2 and Formula 3, well, they won't fold necessarily because of F1. I mean, they are actually owned by them, so if the company folded, maybe they would, but I just can't see that happening. They just need a platform to operate on. They are standalone entities. They're all very successful in their own right. I mean, come on, look, Formula 3 has been around forever, and they just need a new platform if there was no Formula 1. But I do think Formula 1 is going to be here. I don't think it's going to change. I really can't see a doomsday scenario where Formula 1 goes anywhere. But while we're on the subject of F2 and F3, one thing I immediately thought when we're talking about this sort of Formula 1 bubble moving around Europe with these weird looking Formula 1 races in weird locations and 2 back-to-back races and all these kind of things, what happens to the support races of F2 and F3? My first thought on that was that they're not going to happen. Surely they're not going to happen because no broadcaster is going to be able to put them on TV. I mean, Sky Sports can because they have their own channel, but most other broadcasters won't be able to broadcast them. So Formula 2 and Formula 3, whilst they do get broadcast in on some places, they're also there for the benefit of the fans, in the arena, in the stadium, in the circuit. If there's no fans in those circuits, do we need support races? And my thought was probably we won't. But Trevor Carlin, I saw a quote from him last week that said he thinks that they will go to at least some, maybe the European races, if it's safe to do so. But that's a huge logistical challenge, which will also need that whole testing process and everything else that we've been talking about with Formula 1 as well. So that's huge. That's making the problem way more complicated. Now, it's really important for those people in Formula 2 and in Formula 3, the drivers, the teams, the sponsors, the fans of those series. But the priority in this period of time is to get some F1 racing going. So I think that's where all focus will probably be. Pag wrecks me on project cars all the damn time. What did you think of that IndyCar esports? I mean, gate, IndyCar gate over the weekend. Madness. I mean, big up to Lando Norris because he was doing incredibly well. And yeah, he made a move that in Formula One we wouldn't have looked twice at, thinking it was anything dodgy. But in IndyCar on oval racing, perhaps he went 3 abreast into that turn, which you just wouldn't do in real life. But come on, it wasn't that bad. But even if it was, what Padge did afterwards was just brutal. He sat in the pits saying, right, we're going to go and get Lando. We're going to take him out. And he went and did it. Norris was robbed. He absolutely he was, David. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It was a joke. Yeah, the race was so entertaining. It was too bad for the last laps. It was. And I didn't see the whole thing, I must admit. But it looked like a really entertaining race. The McLaren guys, the McLaren SP cars were all running, I think, in the top 3 at one point, weren't they? Before all disaster struck. Jacques Villeneuve was 3 wide at Indy. Well, that's Jacques Villeneuve, isn't it? He does whatever he wants. Poor sportsmanship from Pag. Yeah, it was. And that's the point. You know, yes, as I said in the video earlier today, if you haven't seen that, check that out. We talked about this earlier, but it may well just be a game or a simulation. But the point was there were sponsors on board. This was a really highly professionally organised event by IndyCar, you know, and this is way bigger than what Formula One are doing with their Codemasters Virtual GP. This was on iRacing, probably the biggest sim racing platform, the most professional sim racing platform. As I said earlier, it was wearing his team kit, emblazoned with sponsors. There were sponsors all over the event, and he went and did that in front of the world. It was silly, but there we go. Right, couple of minutes left, 2 or 3 minutes left. Zach, yeah, I agree, Mark. Zach Brown was not happy about it. I'm sure he wasn't, David. I'm sure Zach Brown was not happy. It did not put them into a good light at all as an IndyCar series. Certainly not Pagano, not at all. Let's see, what have we got? Last couple of mins. Does DRS still make sense with the new regs? Great question. On paper, no. But what they are going to do is keep DRS, certainly for the first year of the new regs, and kind of see how it goes. And what they have the ability to do, as they do now, is adapt how they use that, how many DRS zones there are, at what point the detection and activation lines are, or zones are. So they can play around with all of that, and they can even decide if they want to take it out of the equation. So if the new regulations with the ground effect downforce producing cars, which are now coming in 2022, of course, the theory behind them is that everyone's going to be able to race much closer because there's less disturbed, dirty air being chucked out the sides than we have now, which hinders them so much. So the theory being 2022, in a perfect world, we'll have cars racing nose to tail all the way around, being able to chase each other, fight each other and overtake each other, and then DRS just won't be necessary. And I think in an ideal world, what we'll do is we'll have 2022 where we test that out, we bring the new cars along, we keep DRS. If 2023 comes along and we've said, right, it's very clear and obvious, DRS isn't needed anymore, we'll get rid of it. And I think that is how Formula One are looking at this right now. I think it's very sensible. I'd love to see DRS gone, and I'd love to see it gone because we don't need it. I don't just hate DRS, I think it's there for a purpose. I definitely think we could change the way it works, but that's a whole other discussion. But in terms of if it can go because we no longer need it, well, that's great. That means Formula One's taken a giant step forward. It's 9:30, folks. I do want to try and keep these to half an hour because otherwise we'll just get running away with ourselves. But look, I hope you've enjoyed this. I definitely have. It's great. I could chat Formula One literally all day long if someone is happy to listen. It's why I started a YouTube channel in the beginning. But there you go. I really appreciate you all joining in. So thank you very much. Claire Priestley says it's beer o'clock. You're absolutely right, darling. Right, I'm going to go and get a beer with the missus. I'll see you guys probably with another video tomorrow. I haven't planned anything, but you know, that's how it goes. And then we're back tomorrow night, 9 p.m. So set your reminders, tell your mates. We'll do this all over again tomorrow with another couple of subjects. If you want to suggest any, please do. And I'll see you then. I've loved it. I hope it works out for you guys. See you tomorrow. Ta-da.